My mother always called me the family fool, while my brother was praised as the golden genius. On the day of his lavish graduation party, she stood in front of 100 wealthy guests and announced he would inherit everything: a brand new Ferrari and a $10 million Hamptons villa. She pointed me out in the back of the room, mocking me for being a college dropout who scrubs floors. I just sat there quietly sipping my water. Because what my mother and my arrogant brother did not know was that the very ground they were standing on, the car in the driveway, and the entire life they were showing off actually belonged to me. And in exactly 5 minutes, a man in a black suit was going to walk through those doors, hand me an envelope, and help me take it all away. My name is Sloane, and I am 33 years old. Before I continue this story and tell you exactly how I dismantled my family's fake empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to let toxic family members dig their own graves. The sharp, piercing ring of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal champagne glass echoed through the massive living room. The chatter of over 100 high society guests instantly died down. I sat alone at a small table near the back patio doors, my hands folded perfectly in my lap, watching the spectacle unfold. Standing at the center of the room, wearing a designer gown that cost more than most people make in a year, was my mother, Beatrice. She was 60 years old, but spent a fortune trying to look 40. Beside her stood my older brother, Cameron. He was 35, wearing a custom-tailored suit and sporting a smug, practiced smile that he probably rehearsed in the mirror all morning. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this monumental day," my mother announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She reached out and grabbed Cameron by the arm, pulling him closer to her side. "We are here to honor my brilliant son Cameron, my golden genius. Today he officially receives his master's degree from Harvard University. I always knew he was destined for absolute greatness. He carries the true legacy of this family and brings nothing but pride to our name." The crowd erupted into polite applause. Cameron puffed out his chest, nodding confidently to the wealthy investors and family friends gathered around them. I picked up my glass of iced water and took a slow, deliberate sip. The ice cubes clinked softly against the rim. I felt absolutely nothing. No jealousy, no anger, just a cold, calculating patience. My mother held up her hand to quiet the room. Her eyes scanned the crowd, gliding over the faces of her wealthy friends before landing directly on me, sitting in the shadows at the back. Her warm smile vanished in an instant, replaced by a thin, cruel smirk. "Of course it is a blessing that Cameron is so gifted," my mother continued, raising her voice so everyone in the room could hear her clearly, especially considering the other massive disappointment I had to raise. "I am sure you all remember my daughter Sloane." Heads turned immediately. Dozens of pairs of eyes locked onto me. Some people looked pitying, others just looked amused at the public shaming. "Yes, she is actually here today," my mother said, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through the silence. "I suppose we have to include her, even if she is the family fool." While Cameron was burning the midnight oil in the Ivy League, Sloane decided college was simply too hard for her to handle. She dropped out years ago. Last I checked, she was scrubbing floors and fetching coffee for some nameless company in the city. But please, Sloane, do try to learn something from your brother today. Maybe some of his relentless ambition will finally rub off on you. A few of my mother's closest friends chuckled quietly. Cameron looked right at me from across the room and shook his head in mock pity. I did not break eye contact with him. I did not shrink down in my chair. I did not let a single tear form in my eyes. I just swallowed my water, set the glass down gently on the pristine white tablecloth, and offered them both a completely blank, deadpan stare. Years ago, a public humiliation like this would have broken me entirely. I would have run out the back doors, locked myself in my cheap apartment, and cried until I was sick. I would have asked the universe why my own mother hated me so much, why I was never enough, why Cameron was treated like a god, while I was treated like dirt on their expensive shoes. But at 33 years old, I had built an impenetrable fortress of boundaries around my mind and my heart. I knew exactly who I was, and more importantly, I knew exactly who they were. Let them laugh. Let my mother spin her ridiculous fairy tales of legacy and genius. I had learned the hard way that people who shout the loudest about their immense wealth are usually the ones drowning in the deepest, darkest debt. I glanced at the gold watch on my wrist. The timing was almost perfectly aligned. I smoothed out the fabric of my dress and leaned back in my chair. My mother turned her attention back to Cameron, ready to present him with the ultimate rewards for his supposed hard work. She was preparing to hand him the keys to the kingdom. What neither of them realized was that I owned the castle, the land, and the locks on the doors, and the wrecking ball was already swinging their way. Beatrice clapped her hands together, a sharp sound snapping the crowd back to attention. And now she declared, her voice echoing through the grand room, for the moment we have all been waiting for. A Harvard man cannot enter the corporate world empty-handed. He requires the proper tools to establish his dominance. She snapped her fingers at a waiter standing by the staircase. The young man hurried over, carrying a silver tray lined with black velvet. Resting perfectly in the center was a gleaming red key fob. The silver horse emblem caught the light of the chandeliers. "For your commute to the top of the financial world," my mother announced, beaming with pride. "A brand new Ferrari Roma. It is parked in the driveway right now." The guests gasped. A murmur of intense jealousy swept through the room. Cameron feigned a look of complete shock, covering his mouth while grabbing the keys. He held them high in the air like a trophy, and the room erupted into cheers. But my mother was not finished. She held up her hands, demanding silence. "Put the keys in your pocket, darling," she said, her eyes gleaming with manic joy. "Because a magnificent car needs a magnificent garage, and a brilliant man needs an estate worthy of his future family." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick legal folder. She waved it in the air for all the wealthy onlookers to see. "This is the deed to this very property. $10 million of prime Hamptons real estate, 6 bedrooms, a heated infinity pool, and private beach access. As of this morning, Cameron, it is entirely yours. A legacy gift from my golden boy." The applause was deafening. People whistled and raised their champagne glasses. Cameron looked like he had just conquered the world. He hugged our mother, lifting her off the ground. Then he confidently strode to the center of the room and grabbed the microphone. He cleared his throat, adjusting the lapels of his custom suit. "Thank you," Cameron said, his voice deep and practiced. "Thank you all. Harvard taught me many things, but the most important lesson I learned is that true greatness requires relentless sacrifice. It requires a vision that ordinary people simply do not possess. I look around this room and I see the elite. I see people who understand what it takes to win." He paused, letting his arrogant words sink in. Then his eyes locked onto mine again. The smug grin on his face widened into something genuinely cruel. "And speaking of ordinary people," Cameron continued, gesturing lazily in my direction. "Sloane, I want you to know that despite your lack of ambition, I am a generous man. Now that I own this massive estate, the upkeep is going to be quite demanding. If you ever find yourself struggling to make rent on whatever tiny apartment you are living in these days, give me a call. The pool filter gets awfully clogged around this time of year. I am sure you know your way around a scrub brush. I pay minimum wage, but since you are family, I might throw in a free lunch." Laughter rippled through the room once more. It was an ugly, sycophantic sound, but my eyes darted away from Cameron and landed on the woman standing slightly behind him. Simone. Simone was 32 years old, and arguably the most intelligent person in my brother's immediate circle. She was a stunning black woman, dressed in a sleek emerald pantsuit that screamed quiet luxury. Simone was not born into old money like the rest of the parasites in this room. She was a highly successful commercial real estate agent who clawed her way to the top of the New York market. She knew the value of a dollar and the weight of hard work. As Cameron delivered his humiliating punchline, I watched Simone closely. She tried to maintain her polished, supportive wife persona, but the facade was cracking. Her forced smile tightened into a grimace. She shifted her weight uncomfortably, her eyes darting to the floor. She looked visibly repulsed by her husband's public cruelty. Simone had always been polite to me, keeping a safe distance from our toxic family dynamics, but right now she looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. She crossed her arms very tightly over her chest, stepping subtly away from Cameron as he continued to bask in the glow of his own arrogance. I took another sip of my water. Hang in there, Simone, I thought to myself. If you think his joke was tasteless, just wait until you find out how he paid for that Ferrari. The real entertainment has not even started yet. Believe me, the absolute truth will completely shatter him. The laughter echoing around the room was not polite chuckling anymore. It was loud, abrasive, and humiliating. Guests who had known me since I was a little girl were openly sneering at me. My Uncle Thomas, my mother's older brother, who had not worked a real job in 20 years but loved spending his wife's money, decided to join the firing squad. He walked over to my table, holding his champagne glass by the stem, and leaned down close to my face. "You really should wipe that miserable look off your face right now, Sloane," Uncle Thomas said, his breath smelling of expensive gin. "Your mother was generous enough to even invite you to this event. You have always been so bitter about Cameron succeeding where you failed. Be a good girl for once and show some genuine gratitude. You are embarrassing the entire family by sitting back here pouting in the shadows." I looked up at Uncle Thomas. I did not pout. I did not scowl. I simply gave him a hollow, unblinking stare that made him shift his weight uncomfortably and step back. The collective gaslighting in this room was reaching a toxic peak. For my entire life, this was the exact dynamic. If Cameron did something cruel, it was a harmless joke. If I reacted to the cruelty, I was sensitive and bitter. My mother had trained all our relatives to view me as the defective child, the permanent scapegoat who existed solely to make the golden boy shine brighter. I placed my linen napkin on the table. The setup was complete. They had shown their true colors to everyone in the room. I had given them enough rope and they had eagerly tied it around their own necks. It was finally time to shift the power dynamic. I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress, and picked up my small clutch purse. I took one deliberate step toward the side hallway, making it look as though I was retreating in total defeat. I did not make it 3 steps before a manicured hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. It was my mother. She had practically sprinted across the room in her designer heels to intercept me. Her fingers dug into my collarbone, a physical reminder of her desperate need to control me. "Where do you think you are going?" Beatrice hissed, her voice low enough that only the closest guests could hear the venom, though her fake smile remained plastered on her face. "You do not get to storm out of here and ruin your brother's perfect day just because you are jealous." "I am not ruining anything, Mother," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. "I am simply leaving your party. You have made your grand speeches, you have handed out your fake trophies. My presence here is clearly no longer required by anyone." "Oh, you are not leaving until you pay your dues," she snapped viciously. She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She forcefully shoved it directly against my chest. The paper fluttered and fell to the floor right by my feet. "Pick it up, Sloane. That is the catering invoice for this afternoon. $5,000. I looked down at the paper, then back up at her eyes, which were wild with a desperate need to assert total dominance over me. "Since you contributed absolutely nothing to Cameron's educational journey," Beatrice announced, now raising her voice so the entire room could witness my supposed financial ruin, "paying for the food is the least you can do. Consider it a tax for being a massive disappointment. You can put it on whatever maxed-out credit card you have left. Do not even think about walking out those front doors until the caterer is paid in full." The room fell dead silent. The suffocating tension was so thick you could choke on it. Over 100 people were holding their breath, waiting to see if I would break down, crying, scream, or pull out my wallet in total submission. Cameron was grinning from ear to ear, leaning against his new leased Ferrari keys, loving every single second of my public crucifixion. Simone looked horrified, her hand covering her mouth as she realized just how deeply disturbed her husband's family truly was. I did not pick up the invoice. I stood perfectly still, my posture completely straight, and I looked my mother dead in the eye. I opened my mouth to speak, but before a single word could leave my lips, a loud, booming sound shattered the silence. The massive, heavy oak front doors of the Hamptons villa swung open with a violent crack. The heavy brass handles hit the interior walls, making several guests jump out of their skin and drop their expensive drinks. The sea of wealthy socialites parted instantly, creating a clear path from the grand entrance all the way to the back of the room where I stood. Through the open doorway stepped a man who immediately commanded the oxygen in the room. He was 50 years old, wearing a charcoal gray suit that was tailored with absolute precision. His silver hair was neatly swept back, and his expression was as cold and unreadable as a slab of granite. This was Dominic Pierce. He walked with the measured, terrifying confidence of a man who held the fates of multi-million-dollar corporations in the palm of his hand. Behind him, two of my mother's hired security guards were scrambling, looking panicked and out of breath. They reached out as if to grab his shoulders, but Dominic simply turned his head and gave them a single icy glare. It was the kind of look that communicated massive legal and financial ruin to anyone who dared touch him. The guards froze in their tracks, stepping back and lowering their hands in instant submission. They did not want any part of whatever storm this man was bringing inside. Dominic turned his attention back to the center of the room and began walking down the aisle that the startled guests had unknowingly formed for him. His leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the imported marble floors. Cameron, whose ego had been inflated to the size of a blimp just moments before, instantly felt his spotlight being stolen. His face flushed bright red with sudden anger. He dropped his arm from around our mother and stepped forward, puffing out his chest to assert his dominance over what he thought was his newly gifted territory. "Hey!" Cameron shouted, his voice cracking slightly with a mix of rage and panic. "Who the hell do you think you are? This is a private event. You cannot just barge in here. Security, get this guy out of my house right now." Dominic did not even blink. He did not slow his pace, nor did he look in Cameron's direction. It was as if a tiny, annoying insect was buzzing somewhere in the background. The ultimate insult to a narcissist is total indifference, and Dominic delivered it flawlessly. He walked right past Cameron, brushing a few inches from my brother's shoulder, leaving Cameron standing there with his mouth hanging open like a fool. The wealthy guests pressed themselves against the walls and dining tables, their eyes darting between this imposing stranger, my furious brother, and my fiercely glaring mother. Beatrice opened her mouth to scream an order, but the sheer gravity of Dominic's presence caught the words in her throat. Even she recognized power when she saw it, and she knew instinctively that this man possessed far more of it than anyone else in her social circle. Dominic reached the back of the room where I was standing. My mother was still frozen right beside me, her hand hovering awkwardly in the air where she had just been shoving the catering invoice against my chest. Dominic stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. The imposing, terrifying aura he carried through the room vanished the second he looked at me. He brought his feet together, placed one hand over the button of his suit jacket, and bowed slightly at the waist. It was a gesture of profound, undeniable respect. A gesture nobody in this family had ever shown me in my entire 33 years of life. My mother gasped sharply, taking a clumsy step backward. Her eyes were wide with total disbelief, darting wildly between my calm face and the back of Dominic's perfectly tailored suit. Dominic reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket and retrieved a thick, heavy envelope. It was made of premium red parchment and sealed with a dollop of deep crimson wax. The wax bore the official emblem of my holding company. He held it out to me with both hands, offering it as if it were a crown. I reached out and took it, feeling the satisfying weight of the documents inside. The crinkle of the heavy paper seemed entirely too loud in the silent room. Then Dominic leaned in slightly. The room was so incredibly quiet that every single person sitting at the front tables could hear what he was about to say. He did not speak in a rush. He delivered the words with the sharp, devastating clarity of an executioner reading a final sentence. "Madam CEO." Dominic whispered, his voice resonating through the tense air. All the preparations are complete. It is time to show them who you really are. A dead, suffocating silence slammed down over the room. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpets. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The catering invoice my mother had forced upon me fluttered from her trembling fingers and landed unnoticed on the floor. The laughter and the mocking whispers from just 2 minutes ago felt like they belonged to a different century. The guests stared at me, their champagne glasses suspended halfway to their mouths, completely paralyzed by the sudden shift in reality. Simone, standing near the front, widened her eyes in sudden realization, her sharp business instincts kicking in as she assessed the undeniable authority of the man bowing before me. And my mother, the woman who had spent my entire life calling me the family fool, looked at me as if I had just risen from the dead. The game was finally over, and I was holding the winning hand. My mother was the first to break the paralyzing silence. She let out a sharp, breathless scoff that echoed awkwardly across the dining area. Her face was pale, but her desperate need to maintain her high society facade forced her into immediate denial. She pointed a manicured finger at Dominic, then shifted her glare to me, letting out another loud, theatrical laugh that sounded completely hollow. "Oh, please!" Beatrice sneered, her voice trembling slightly despite her arrogant tone. "Are we seriously supposed to believe this little performance?" "Sloane, this is beyond pathetic even for you. Did you actually go out and hire a cheap actor to come in here and pretend you are important? How much did you pay this man to bow to you? $50 and a free meal." Cameron immediately jumped on the lifeline our mother threw him. His bruised ego demanded it. He chuckled, adjusting his designer tie, though the sweat forming on his forehead betrayed his sudden anxiety. "It is actually quite sad," Cameron added, stepping forward to address the crowd, as if he were explaining a magic trick gone wrong to a group of children. "My sister has always had a vivid imagination. When reality becomes too difficult for her to handle, she invents these little fantasies to make herself feel better about her failures. Let us just get the real security guards to escort this hired help off the property so we can get back to celebrating actual achievements." Dominic did not flinch. He did not defend himself or engage with their childish insults. He simply stood beside me, an immovable mountain of authority, his cold gaze fixed straight ahead. He knew he did not have to say a single word because the ultimate weapon was already in my hands. I looked down at the heavy red parchment envelope. The deep crimson wax seal felt cool against my thumb. I did not rush. I let the murmurs of the wealthy guests rise again, letting their confusion stew. Then, with a single deliberate motion, I snapped the wax seal. The sharp crack of the hardened wax breaking was incredibly satisfying. It sounded like a bone snapping in the quiet room. I slid my fingers inside and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. The crisp rustle of the pages cut through the tension. These were not cheap printouts or forged internet certificates. They were heavy watermarked financial records, embossed with official state seals, notarized signatures, and the unmistakable logo of Apex Holdings. The sheer physical presence of the papers commanded respect. It was the undeniable weight of absolute proof, gathered over months of meticulous auditing and legal preparation. Beatrice stared at the documents, and for a fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed across her heavily powdered face. She recognized the layout of formal legal bindings. She had spent her entire life navigating the loopholes of the wealthy elite, and she knew a binding contract when she saw one. But her narcissism simply would not allow her to accept defeat in front of her country club friends. She straightened her posture, lifting her chin to look down her nose at me. I held the documents in my left hand and took a slow, measured step away from the back table. The crowd parted for me this time, not out of mockery, but out of sheer curiosity and rising tension. I walked straight toward the center of the room, where my mother and brother stood. Cameron tried to block my path, puffing out his chest to physically intimidate me, just like he did when we were teenagers. He wanted to use his size to force me back into the shadows, but I was no longer the scared little girl he used to bully. And I was not alone. Dominic matched my pace perfectly, stepping seamlessly between me and my brother. Dominic did not push Cameron. He simply stood there radiating the kind of lethal professional danger that made a spoiled boy like Cameron instantly shrink back. Cameron swallowed hard, his fake bravado evaporating, and moved out of my way. I reached the front of the room. A silver microphone was resting on a sleek black stand near the massive tiered graduation cake. I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal of the microphone and lifted it off the stand. The soft hum of the audio feedback made everyone in the room flinch slightly. I looked directly at my mother. Her fake smile had completely melted away. Her jaw was clenched so tight I thought her teeth might shatter. I looked at Cameron, who was gripping the Ferrari keys in his pocket so hard his knuckles were turning white. Finally, I looked at Simone, who was watching me with intense, calculated focus. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice did not shake. It was smooth, commanding, and projected clearly through the expensive sound system, reaching every single corner of the $10 million estate. "Mother," I said calmly, letting the word hang in the air for a fraction of a second. "You have put on a truly spectacular show today. The speeches were lovely, the catering is excellent. But there is a massive flaw in your grand presentation." Beatrice narrowed her eyes, her chest heaving with barely contained rage. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, trying to lunge forward and grab the microphone from my hand. I pulled it back easily, stepping out of her reach. "I am talking about the gifts." I continued, my tone completely conversational, which only made the impact infinitely worse. "You cannot give Cameron the brand new Ferrari Roma parked in the front driveway. And you certainly cannot give him the deed to this $10 million Hamptons villa." A collective gasp rippled through the sea of socialites. People leaned in their champagne flutes, completely forgotten. The wealthy feed on scandal, and I was serving them a feast. Cameron let out a loud, aggressive scoff, ripping the lease papers from his pocket to wave them around, opening his mouth to scream that I was insane. Before he could get a single syllable out, I dropped the absolute truth right on top of them. I held up the stack of legal documents for the entire room to see. "Because, Mother," I stated firmly, staring right into her terrified eyes, "you do not own either of them." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. For a moment, nobody even dared to take a breath. Then Cameron let out a harsh, aggressive bark of laughter. He threw his head back, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, looking at the crowd as if I had told the funniest joke in the world. "You are completely out of your mind, Sloane!" Cameron shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He took a step toward me, pointing an accusing finger. "I knew you were jealous, but I did not think you were delusional. Do you seriously think you can march in here with some printed garbage and convince everyone that our mother is a liar?" He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper. He unfolded it with an exaggerated flick of his wrist, holding it up high for the guests at the front tables to see. "This is the registration paperwork for the Ferrari." He sneered, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. "Mother handed it to me this morning. It has the vehicle identification number, the dealership seal, and all the proof anyone needs. You are embarrassing yourself, Sloane. Just pack up your little briefcase and get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." I did not raise my voice. I did not match his frantic, aggressive energy. I simply lowered the microphone for a second and gave Dominic a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Dominic did not say a word. He calmly reached into his own jacket, pulled out a sleek silver tablet, and tapped the screen twice. Instantly, the massive 80-inch flat-screen television mounted above the marble fireplace blinked to life. The sudden flash of bright blue light drew the attention of every guest in the room. They turned away from Cameron and stared up at the massive display. Cameron froze, his arms still awkwardly raised in the air, holding his piece of paper. He looked over his shoulder at the television, and the arrogant smirk on his face vanished so quickly it was almost comical. Displayed in crystal-clear high definition was an official financial document. It was not a simple registration card. It was an auto finance contract from the most exclusive exotic car dealership in the state. Sections of the document were highlighted in bright yellow, so even the people in the back could read the fine print. I brought the microphone back up to my mouth. "Let us look at the actual facts, Cameron," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "That piece of paper you are waving around is just a placeholder. The document currently projected on the screen behind you is the legally binding financial contract. And the first thing everyone in this room should notice is that the Ferrari Roma parked in the driveway was not purchased." I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the guests, who were now leaning in, captivated by the drama. "It is a lease," I announced loudly. "And it is a terrible lease at that. It is a 36-month agreement with an astronomical interest rate. Whoever signed this document was desperate to portray extreme wealth without having the liquid assets to back it up." My mother let out a strangled gasp. She took a step toward the television, her hands trembling. "Sloane, stop this right now!" she hissed, her voice cracking. "This is family business. You have no right to display this. It gets much better." "Mother," I continued, ignoring her completely, "because the most interesting part of this contract is not the terrible financial terms. It is the signature at the bottom of the page." I tapped the side of the microphone, keeping the rhythm steady. "Cameron, why do you not tell your lovely audience whose name is actually on that lease? Because it certainly is not yours. Your personal credit score has been abysmal ever since you defaulted on those credit cards 3 years ago. The dealership would not let you test drive a used sedan, let alone lease a $300,000 supercar." Cameron stood paralyzed, his face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. His jaw worked up and down, but no sound came out. "And it is not your name either, Mother," I said, shifting my gaze to Beatrice. "You maxed out your available credit lines months ago trying to keep up appearances for your country club friends. So who secured the financing for this magnificent graduation gift?" I gestured toward Dominic. He tapped his tablet one more time. The image on the massive television zoomed in sharply on the signature block at the bottom of the final page. The printed name was blown up to massive proportions impossible to miss. I looked away from the screen and locked eyes directly with my sister-in-law. Simone was standing near the front row, staring up at the television with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. I spoke the name clearly into the microphone. "The primary leaseholder is Simone." The name echoed through the Hamptons villa and landed like a physical blow. Every single head in the room swiveled simultaneously toward the front row. Simone stood completely frozen, her jaw dropped slightly, and the elegant composure she had maintained all afternoon instantly shattered. She stared up at the massive 80-inch television screen, her dark eyes tracking the highlighted yellow text illuminating the dark room. Cameron scrambled. He dropped his fake registration paper and lunged toward the television, waving his arms as if he could physically erase the projection. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Turn that screen off right now. This is a complete lie meant to destroy my marriage." "It is not a fabrication, Cameron," I said, my voice steady. "It is a certified bank record pulled directly from the dealership financing department 2 days ago. And frankly, it is textbook financial abuse." I turned my attention to Simone, who was trembling not out of sadness, but out of a rapidly building rage. "Simone," I said gently, "I am sorry to expose this publicly, but you needed to know before he ruined you completely. Your husband is drowning in hidden debt. He maxed out undisclosed credit lines and his personal credit score is ruined. No legitimate bank in New York would lend him $1 for coffee, let alone $300,000 for a sports car." Simone did not blink. She kept staring at the screen in disbelief. "So he did the only thing a coward in his position could do." I continued, making sure the crowd heard every single syllable. "He waited until you were asleep, went into your home office, and stole your personal financial information. He used your pristine credit score, your social security number, and your stellar debt-to-income ratio from your real estate firm to secure the financing. He forged your signature on a legally binding auto lease. If he misses a single monthly payment, the dealership will not come after him." They will come after you. They will garnish your commissions, ruin your credit, and destroy your professional real estate license. The guests gasped collectively. In wealthy circles, stealing money is one thing, but destroying another person's pristine credit score is considered the ultimate unforgivable sin. Whispers of disgust began rippling through the wealthy crowd. Cameron spun around to face his wife, holding his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Simone, baby, please listen to me." He begged, his arrogant facade completely gone, replaced by the pathetic whining of a cornered rat. "Do not listen to my crazy sister. I can explain everything. It is just a temporary paperwork mix-up. I was going to transfer the lease to my name next month once my new job finalized the signing bonus. I swear on my life, I would never put you at financial risk." Simone did not look at him. She did not even acknowledge his existence. Her eyes were locked onto the man standing beside me. "Dominic." She stepped forward, her emerald pantsuit catching the light as she walked with predatory purpose toward us. The crowd parted for her instantly. Nobody wanted to be in the path of a woman who had just realized her husband had committed identity theft against her. Cameron tried to reach out and grab her arm as she passed him, but she violently swatted his hand away without even breaking her stride. She walked right up to Dominic and held out her hand. "Give me the physical papers," she demanded. Her voice was low, terrifyingly calm, and carried an undeniable edge of absolute authority. Dominic nodded respectfully. He reached into the red envelope and pulled out the original hard copy of the financing agreement. He handed it to her without hesitation. Simone snatched the papers from his hands. She held them up to the light, her eyes scanning the dense paragraphs of legal jargon and complicated financial terms. She flipped to the last page. She stared at the signature line. Someone had painstakingly attempted to copy her elegant cursive signature, but the loops were entirely wrong. The pressure of the pen was hesitant and sloppy. It was a blatant and entirely pathetic forgery. She looked at the Social Security number printed clearly at the very top of the application. It was hers. She looked at the stated annual income used to justify the luxury vehicle. It was her exact tax return number from the previous fiscal year. Cameron had violated every boundary of their marriage, accessing her private tax documents to buy a toy he could use to flex on his wealthy friends. The realization hit her with full force. She was on the hook for a massive financial liability she never agreed to. Simone did not cry. She did not collapse to process the betrayal. She built an empire in commercial real estate. When backed into a corner, she fought. Simone lowered the forged contract and turned to face Cameron. The distance between them felt infinite. Cameron took a hesitant step forward, holding his hands up in a weak gesture, wearing a pathetic expression that only made him look guiltier. "Simone, please." Cameron whispered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Let us go into the other room and talk about this privately. We can fix this together. I promise you." Simone did not say a single word in response to his pathetic plea. She simply closed the distance between them in two quick, purposeful strides. She raised her right hand high in the air and delivered a brutal, open-palmed slap directly across his face. The sound of the violent impact echoed through the cavernous living room like a gunshot. It was so intense and so sudden that several wealthy guests physically jumped backward. Cameron stumbled away, completely caught off guard by the sheer force of the blow. He grabbed the side of his face, his eyes wide with utter shock and sudden pain. A bright red handprint immediately began to form across his cheek and jawline. The entire room was paralyzed. Nobody dared to breathe. "You forged my signature," Simone screamed, her voice tearing through the dead silence with absolute unadulterated fury. "You went into my locked filing cabinet, stole my tax returns, and committed federal identity theft just so you could show off a sports car you cannot even afford to put gas in." Cameron cowered, still holding his burning cheek. "Baby, I was going to pay it off," he stammered defensively, looking around frantically at the high society guests who were now staring at him with open, undeniable disgust. "I just needed the car for the optics. You know exactly how important a wealthy image is in my new financial industry. Your industry! Simone spat, eyes blazing with terrifying intensity. You have no industry. You have hidden debt and grand delusions. I hold a premier commercial real estate license in New York. My career relies entirely on my financial integrity and flawless credit score. If this dealership reports a missed payment, or if a fraud investigation is opened, my license is suspended instantly. Simone took another aggressive step toward him, pointing a manicured finger right at his chest. You risked my entire livelihood. You risked everything I sacrificed to build from the ground up, all for a pathetic, childish ego trip. You are not a real man. You are a parasite. Cameron shrank back, completely humiliated in front of the elite crowd he so desperately wanted to impress. The golden boy was being verbally and physically dismantled piece by piece, and he had absolutely no defense left. I am distancing myself from this fraud right now, Simone announced loudly, turning to address the silent room, ensuring over 100 witnesses heard her legal declaration. I have no part in this lease. I did not sign that document, and I will contact my attorney and my bank the second I leave this house. Before Cameron could even attempt to grovel again, Beatrice pushed her way aggressively to the front of the crowd. Her heavily powdered face was purple with boiling rage. She could not stand watching her precious golden boy be publicly humiliated, even when he was completely and undeniably in the wrong. "How dare you strike my son?" Beatrice yelled, stepping right between Simone and Cameron like a delusional mother bear defending her cub. You are his wife. You took a sacred vow to support him through thick and thin. You will not stand in the middle of my beautiful home and disrespect my son in front of my important guests. You should be extremely grateful he even chose to marry someone like you in the first place. Simone slowly turned her deadly gaze away from Cameron and locked eyes directly with my mother. The sheer overwhelming disgust radiating from Simone's face made Beatrice actually take a nervous step backward. Respect him! Simone laughed, a cold, bitter sound that sent chills through the room. I respect real men who build their own wealth, Beatrice. I do not respect pathetic thieves who wait until their wives are asleep to steal their identities to buy shiny luxury toys. He is a fraud and you enabled his entitlement. And as for your beautiful home, you might want to stop defending him and check your own legal paperwork instead. Because according to what your daughter just revealed on that television screen, you do not even own the expensive marble floor you are standing on right now. Simone's words hung in the air, a devastating blow that shattered the last remaining fragments of my mother's carefully constructed illusion. The silence that followed was suffocating. The elite guest people who had spent the last 3 hours drinking Beatrice's expensive champagne and praising her financial brilliance were now openly staring at her with expressions ranging from pity to profound disgust. Beatrice looked around the room, her eyes darting frantically from face to face. She could see her entire social standing evaporating before her very eyes. Her country club friends were whispering behind their hands. The facade was crumbling, and the sheer terror of being exposed as a fraud pushed her into a state of absolute panic. She could not attack Simone. Simone was a powerhouse with legal standing and a terrifying level of righteous anger, so Beatrice did what she always did when backed into a corner. She pivoted all of her venom, all of her desperation directly onto her favorite punching bag. She turned her entire body to face me. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. She marched toward me, her designer heels sinking heavily into the expensive rug. She pointed a trembling finger right at my face, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. "Fine," Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking wildly as she abandoned any remaining pretense of high society elegance. "The car is a mess. Cameron made a stupid, childish mistake with the financing, but that has absolutely nothing to do with me or my wealth. I am not responsible for my grown son's poor judgment." She reached into her handbag again, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. She yanked out the thick legal folder she had waved around earlier, the one she claimed was the ultimate prize for her golden boy. She held it high above her head, shaking it frantically at the audience. "But this house," she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the marble walls. I bought this house. I paid for it in cash with my late husband's retirement fund and my own investments. I have the official deed right here in my hand. You cannot stand there and lie to these people, Sloane. I am the sole owner of this $10 million estate, and I have the paperwork to prove it. I did not back away from her pointing finger. I did not flinch at her screaming. Instead, a slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a predator that had finally trapped its prey in a corner with absolutely zero chance of escape. I did not even have to speak to give the command. Dominic anticipated the moment perfectly, without a single change in his cold, professional demeanor. He stepped forward and opened the sleek leather briefcase he had carried in alongside the red envelope. He reached inside and pulled out several thick packets of paper bound securely with heavy brass clips. Dominic bypassed Cameron and my mother completely. He walked directly to the front row of the audience. He handed the first packet to Mrs. Kensington, the undisputed queen of the local country club gossip circle. He handed the second to a prominent investment banker my mother had been trying to impress all afternoon. He distributed 5 copies in total to the most influential people in the room. They snatched the documents eagerly, adjusting their reading glasses and flipping through the pages with ravenous curiosity. Beatrice froze. Her hand, still holding her fake deed in the air, began to lower slowly. She watched the wealthy guests reading the papers, her frantic confidence draining away, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice was calm, steady, and loud enough to drown out her desperate gasps. "You did not buy this house, Mother," I said, pronouncing every single word with deliberate, crushing clarity. "You did not pay cash. And that folder you are holding contains nothing but a generic welcome packet from a property management firm." Beatrice shook her head, her mouth opening and closing silently. "3 years ago, I continued holding the gaze of the entire room. You wanted to break into the Hamptons elite. You wanted a sprawling estate to show off to your friends, but you did not have $10 million in liquid assets. You barely had a fraction of that. So you did what you always do. You faked it. You found a luxury property that offered a highly unusual, extremely strict rent-to-own lease agreement. You drained your retirement fund just to cover the massive security deposit and the first year of exorbitant monthly rent. You signed that lease, handed over the money, and moved in, telling everyone you bought the place outright." Mrs. Kensington let out a loud, dramatic gasp from the front row, looking up from the documents in her hands and staring directly at my mother with absolute shock. Beatrice clutched her chest, her face turning completely white. "But I have the option to buy," she stammered, her voice dropping to a pathetic, terrified whisper. "The contract says I can buy it. It says you have the option to buy at the end of a 5-year term," I corrected her sharply, "provided you never miss a single monthly payment. But we both know you ran out of money 6 months ago. You are broke, Mother. And you never owned a single brick of this house." Beatrice shook her head furiously. The heavy diamond necklace around her neck caught the light as she trembled. She looked wildly at the investment banker, who was still flipping through the property documents Dominic had handed him. The banker did not meet her eye. He just cleared his throat and took a very deliberate step away from her, adjusting his tie, as if her sudden financial ruin might somehow rub off on his expensive suit. "That is impossible," Beatrice stammered, pointing a shaky finger at the papers. "I know exactly who I pay my rent to. I send a wire transfer every single month to the corporate accounts of Apex Holdings. They are a massive real estate conglomerate based in Manhattan. You are just a college dropout who scrubs floors. You have absolutely nothing to do with Apex Holdings. You hacked into their system to print those fake papers to embarrass me." I smiled patiently, the way you would smile at a child throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. "I did not hack into anything, Mother," I replied, making sure the microphone captured the absolute calm in my voice. "And you are right about one thing. Apex Holdings is a massive real estate conglomerate. We own commercial skyscrapers, luxury residential portfolios, and thousands of acres of prime coastal real estate. But you are entirely wrong about who sits at the top of that empire." I gestured toward Dominic, who was standing with his hands folded neatly in front of him, radiating quiet intimidation. "Dominic here is my lead legal counsel," I explained to the breathless crowd. "He handles all of my acquisitions. You see, Mother, when you signed that ridiculous rent-to-own lease 3 years ago, you were dealing with a subsidiary property management firm. 2 years ago, my company bought that firm. We absorbed their entire portfolio, including this overpriced Hamptons villa. I became your landlord." Beatrice stopped breathing. Her eyes darted from me to Dominic and back again. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "I watched your financial decline in real time." I continued, my voice stripping away every last shred of her dignity. "I saw the desperate wire transfers. I saw you drain the last of your retirement accounts to keep up the appearance of ridiculous wealth. And then 6 months ago, the payments simply stopped. You defaulted on the lease. You ignored the warnings from my legal department. You threw the certified letters in the trash because you thought you were invincible as long as you threw expensive parties for your country club friends. You cannot do this to me, Beatrice," whispered, her voice cracking as the carefully applied makeup on her face seemed to crack with it. "I am your mother. You cannot throw me out on the street. You threw me out when I was 19. I reminded her softly but firmly. "You told me I was useless. You told me to figure it out on my own. So I did. I built an empire while you spent every dime you had trying to impress people who do not even care about you." I looked down at the gold watch on my wrist. It was a custom piece worth more than the lease on Cameron's fake Ferrari. "You have missed 6 months of rent, Mother," I announced, projecting my voice so every single wealthy guest could hear the final judgment. "The legal grace period expired yesterday. Your formal eviction notice went into effect exactly 10 minutes ago. You do not have the option to buy. You do not have the right to stay. You are officially trespassing on my property." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Beatrice stumbled backward, her knees buckling beneath her. She reached out blindly, her manicured hands grasping for anything to hold on to. She caught the edge of a velvet dining chair and collapsed heavily into it. The expensive champagne glass she had left on the table tipped over, spilling golden liquid across the pristine white linen, soaking into the fabric like a spreading stain. She sat there completely broken. The woman who had commanded the room with such arrogant authority just 15 minutes ago was now a hollow, shivering shell. Her wealthy friends, the people she had sacrificed her entire financial future to impress, were actively backing away from her. Nobody rushed to comfort her. Nobody offered her a single word of support. In the cutthroat world of the elite, poverty and fraud were highly contagious diseases, and Beatrice was suddenly patient zero. Cameron, who had been completely silenced by Simone's devastating slap, suddenly snapped out of his shock. His survival instincts kicked in. If his mother was broke, his entire safety net was gone. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, cornered desperation. The golden boy was about to try one last desperate attack. Cameron stepped away from the velvet chair where our mother sat weeping. He straightened his ruined posture, violently tugging at the lapels of his custom suit as if straightening his clothes could somehow straighten out the catastrophic mess he had just made. He looked at Simone, who was already texting her attorney, and realized he had lost his financial anchor. He looked at the country club elites who were whispering and pointing at him. He was drowning, and like any narcissist grasping for a lifeline, he reached for the one thing he believed made him objectively superior to everyone else in the room, especially me. He stormed over to the main display table where his graduation gifts and awards had been neatly arranged. He grabbed the thick, genuine leather diploma case embossed with the gold Harvard University crest. He held it up like a holy relic, turning back to face me with a look of pure, unhinged malice. "You think you have won," Cameron yelled, his voice echoing shrilly, completely stripped of its usual polished charm. "You think because you bought out some cheap property management firm and caught me in a minor paperwork technicality with a car dealership that you are suddenly better than me. You are nothing, Sloane. You are just a bitter, jealous college dropout who got lucky in a volatile real estate market." He took 3 aggressive steps toward me, pointing the leather diploma case directly at my face. He was practically vibrating with rage. "I am a Harvard graduate," he screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Do you have any idea what that means in the real world? It means I am untouchable. It means the hedge funds and private equity firms on Wall Street are already fighting over me. My starting salary alone will be more than your entire pathetic little company makes in a decade." I stood perfectly still, letting his tirade wash over me. The microphone rested loosely in my hand. Dominic remained at my side, his eyes tracking Cameron's every movement, ready to intervene if the golden boy decided to get physical. But Cameron was a coward. He only fought with words and stolen credit cards. "You want to play legal games?" Cameron continued, his spit flying as he ranted. "Fine. Let us play. The second I walk out of this house, I am hiring the most vicious corporate litigators in New York City. I am going to sue you for defamation, for public harassment, and for emotional distress. I will tie your fake little empire up in so much litigation that you will be begging to scrub floors again just to pay your legal fees. I will crush you, Sloane. I will absolutely destroy you, and everything you have built." He waved the diploma case right in front of my eyes, shaking it aggressively. "Look at this," he demanded, his voice cracking. "This is proof of actual genius. This is proof of real, undeniable superiority. You could never achieve this. You were too stupid to even finish your sophomore year at a state school. You will always be the family failure, and no amount of stolen Hamptons real estate will ever change that." The wealthy guests watched the meltdown in stunned silence. Even they could see that Cameron was spiraling out of control. His threats were empty, his posture was frantic, and his attempt to use a piece of paper to shield himself from the reality of his massive financial fraud was pathetic. Simone paused her texting and looked up at him. She let out a short, hollow laugh that cut through his screaming. "You are threatening her with a lawsuit when you literally just committed felony identity theft against your own wife," Simone said loudly, shaking her head in total disbelief. "You are completely delusional, Cameron." Cameron ignored her. He could not handle the truth coming from Simone, so he kept his manic focus entirely on me. He stood there, chest heaving, gripping the Harvard diploma case like a weapon waiting for me to break down. He expected me to argue. He expected me to shout back, to defend my intelligence, or to justify my past. I did none of those things. I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. I simply looked at the leather case in his trembling hands, and then I looked him dead in the eye. A small, cold smile touched the corners of my mouth. The contrast between his desperate, sweating panic and my absolute stillness made him falter. He lowered the diploma case a fraction of an inch, a flicker of uncertainty finally breaking through his arrogant rage. "Are you quite finished?" I asked softly, raising the microphone just enough to carry the chilling calmness of my voice across the room. "Because if you are going to stake your entire future, your legal defense, and your fragile ego on your Ivy League education, we should probably talk about how you actually got there." Cameron opened his mouth to shout another insult, but the words died in his throat. He saw my hand moving. I reached out my free hand. Dominic, reading my cue perfectly, stepped forward and opened the heavy red envelope once again. He reached inside and pulled out a second stack of legal documents. These papers were bound with a thick black clip, and just like the others, they carried the undeniable weight of absolute, undeniable proof. I took the thick papers from Dominic's hand and let the heavy black clip drop onto the marble floor. I held the documents up, holding my microphone close so my voice would carry the absolute weight of the truth. "Let us talk about this Ivy League education you are so incredibly proud of, Cameron," I said, pacing slowly across the open floor. "For the last 2 years, you paraded around New York telling everyone you were awarded a highly prestigious full-ride anonymous scholarship to Harvard. You bragged that out of thousands of applicants, the university board selected you because your academic potential was simply too magnificent to ignore." Cameron puffed out his chest, his grip on the leather diploma case tightening. "That is right," he spat angrily. "They saw my value. They saw what I bring to the table. I earned my place in that program based on pure merit alone." I let out a soft, breathless laugh that made his face twist with anger. You did not earn anything, Cameron, I corrected him, my tone dropping to a deadly serious whisper. You were waitlisted. You were a painfully average applicant with a mediocre undergraduate grade point average and zero extracurricular achievements. The only reason they even looked at your file twice is because a massive influx of cash suddenly arrived to clear your path. I raised the first page of the document and read directly from the highlighted text. This is a formal financial summary from the university bursar office. It details every single tuition payment, room and board fee, and textbook stipend credited to your student account over the entire duration of your graduate program. The total amount comes to just over $200,000. And as you love to tell everyone, I continued looking up from the paper to lock eyes with him. The benefactor requested absolute anonymity. The university told you the money came from a private philanthropic organization dedicated to supporting late bloomers in the financial sector. Cameron scoffed, rolling his eyes. Yes, and I proved them right. I am a top-tier graduate now. So what is your point, Sloane? Are you trying to take credit for an anonymous donor's generosity now? I did not need to take credit because the proof was already here. I'm not taking credit for someone else, I replied, stepping closer to him until we were only a few feet apart. I am taking credit for my own money, because that private philanthropic organization is called the Apex Education Fund, and I am the sole founder and primary financier of that charity. A collective murmur of pure shock ripped through the crowd of wealthy guests. Several people gasped audibly, covering their mouths. Simone, who was still standing nearby, lowered her phone and stared at Cameron with a mix of pity and absolute disgust. Cameron shook his head violently, taking a frantic step backward. He looked like a man who had just been violently punched in the stomach. No, he stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. No, that is completely impossible. The dean of admissions told me it was a distinguished alumni. You are making this up. You forged these papers just like you forged the car lease. You do not have that kind of money. Dominic did not wait for my verbal command this time. He simply tapped his silver tablet. The massive television screen above the fireplace flashed, instantly replacing the humiliating car lease with a new set of financial records. I pointed up at the screen. Look at the television, Cameron, I commanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. Look at the undeniable truth. Displayed in brilliant high definition were 4 separate wire transfer receipts. Each one was routed directly from the corporate accounts of Apex Holdings to the Harvard University Endowment Fund. The dates on the transfers perfectly matched the beginning of each of your academic semesters. But the most devastating detail was at the bottom right corner of every single receipt. Right there, projected massive on the screen, was my exact authorized digital signature approving the transfers. I bought your admission, Cameron. I said the words, slicing through the silent room like a surgical scalpel. I paid for your tuition. I paid for your expensive dorm room. I even paid for the overpriced textbooks you never bothered to open. Every single ounce of that Ivy League prestige you just used to insult my intelligence was purchased entirely with my money. You are not a self-made genius. You are a charity case, and I am your sole benefactor. Cameron dropped the genuine leather diploma case. It hit the marble floor with a pathetic hollow thud, echoing the complete destruction of his fabricated identity. He stood there shivering in his expensive custom-tailored suit, staring up at my signature. My mother could not stand it. Watching her golden child completely stripped of his fake prestige was too much for her fragile narcissistic ego to bear. She jumped out of the velvet dining chair she had collapsed into just moments ago. She pushed past a waiter, nearly knocking over a tray of expensive appetizers, and planted herself firmly between me and the massive television screen. "Stop it!" Beatrice shrieked, waving her arms frantically in the air as if she could physically block the high-definition projection of my financial records. "Stop humiliating him. He is your older brother, Sloane. You are acting like a vicious, vindictive monster." I lowered the microphone slightly, watching her unravel. "I am simply presenting the financial facts, Mother. I replied, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. Facts that directly contradict the fairy tale you both have been selling to everyone in this room. Beatrice was hyperventilating now. The carefully applied blush on her cheeks stood out sharply against her suddenly pale skin. She looked around at the wealthy guests, begging them with her eyes to take her side. When she saw nothing but cold judgment and disgust from her elite country club friends, she turned her absolute rage back on me. "You owed us that money," Beatrice screamed, the veins in her neck bulging with the force of her hysteria. "You have a massive real estate empire. You have millions of dollars sitting in offshore accounts and corporate portfolios. It is incredibly selfish of you to stand here and humiliate your own flesh and blood over a few tuition payments. You should have paid for his education gladly. You owed this family your financial support after everything we did to raise you." I raised an eyebrow, letting the pure absurdity of her statement settle over the silent room. "I owed you," I repeated slowly, making sure the microphone caught the dangerous edge in my tone. "I owed you my financial support. That is a very interesting perspective, Mother, especially considering my own financial situation when I was college age." Beatrice threw her hands up in the air, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "Yes, you owed us," she ranted, completely losing her grip on reality. "You were always so difficult, so rebellious. Cameron was the smart one. Cameron was the one with real potential. It was your duty to step aside and let him shine. It was your duty to sacrifice for the greater good of this family." She was unraveling so fast, she did not even realize the massive trap she was walking blindly into. I did not interrupt her. I let her keep digging her own grave in front of the most influential people in the state. "I had to do it," Beatrice screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "I had to take your father's trust fund to give Cameron a head start. You did not need it. You were just going to waste it on some useless art degree anyway. He needed that money to establish himself. It was my right as a mother to reallocate those funds." The second the words left her mouth, a collective deafening gasp ripped through the crowd. Several women actually clutched their pearls. A prominent investment banker dropped his champagne flute and the glass shattered against the marble floor. Beatrice froze. The echo of her own hysterical confession seemed to finally register in her panicked brain. She slapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening in absolute terror as she looked at the horrified faces of her socialite friends. She had just publicly confessed to a felony. For 15 years, my mother had spun a brilliant, tragic narrative about my academic failure. She told everyone in our affluent neighborhood that I dropped out of my sophomore year of college because I was lazy, because I could not handle the pressure, because I was the family fool. She allowed my relatives to mock me at every holiday dinner. She let Cameron use my lack of a degree as a punchline for over a decade, but the absolute truth was finally out in the open. I did not drop out because the classes were too hard. I dropped out because the day I turned 18, my mother forged my signature, drained the entire $200,000 trust fund my late father had left specifically for my education, and handed every single penny of it to Cameron so he could day trade and gamble it away. She robbed me blind, left me completely broke, and then spent the next 15 years calling me a failure. And now she had just admitted it into a live microphone in front of over 100 wealthy witnesses. The silence that followed her confession was heavier than concrete. Simone put her hand over her mouth, shaking her head in total disgust. Even Cameron looked horrified, not because of what his mother did to me, but because she was stupid enough to admit it out loud. Beatrice lowered her hand from her mouth, trembling uncontrollably. She opened her mouth, trying to form an excuse, trying to walk back the devastating admission, but there were no words left that could save her. The family fool had not just outsmarted them. I had let them completely destroy themselves. I did not let the deafening silence drag on for too long. I raised the microphone and stepped right into the center of the wreckage she had just created. "You heard her perfectly," I announced to the room, my voice steady and completely stripped of any emotion. $200,000. That was the exact amount my father left in a heavily restricted trust fund meant exclusively to cover my university tuition and living expenses. He knew I had a head for business, and he wanted to make sure my future was secure. But the day after I turned 18, my mother marched into the bank. She used her status as my former legal guardian, presented a forged document bearing my signature, and wired the entire balance directly into Cameron's personal checking account. Beatrice kept her hands over her mouth, her eyes darting toward the exits as the reality of her confession truly set in. By the time I was 19, I continued pacing slowly in front of the horrified crowd. I was completely broke. I could not pay for my sophomore year tuition. I could not pay my rent. I was evicted from my tiny off-campus apartment. While my mother was attending charity galas and bragging to all of you about her immense wealth, I was sleeping in the back seat of a rusted 10-year-old sedan. I worked 3 exhausting minimum wage jobs just to afford cheap food and gas. I scrubbed floors just like she loved to remind everyone earlier today. But I did not let that break me. I also taught myself corporate finance on a cheap, refurbished laptop sitting in a public library. I built Apex holdings from absolute scratch fighting tooth and nail for every single dollar I earned, leveraging tiny investments until they became massive commercial acquisitions. I stopped pacing and turned my attention back to Cameron, who was still staring blankly at his dropped Harvard diploma case on the marble floor. And what exactly did the golden genius do with my $200,000? I asked, the sheer contempt dripping heavily from my words. Did he invest it wisely in a diversified portfolio? Did he start a groundbreaking tech company to change the world? Absolutely not. He took my father's hard-earned money and blew it all on terrible margin calls, luxury yacht rentals in Miami, and illegal underground sports gambling. He squandered an entire fortune trying to look like a high-rolling Wall Street player to impress people who did not even care about him. He lost every single penny of my inheritance in less than 14 months. That is the true legacy of this brilliant golden child. Fraud, theft, and absolute financial incompetence. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and entirely unforgiving. In the elite circles of New York society, people might tolerate a certain level of arrogance, but they absolutely despise messy public crimes and pathetic financial failures. A harsh, incredibly judgmental whispering erupted among the wealthy guests. Women who had been air-kissing my mother and complimenting her designer dress just an hour ago were now looking at her like she was a walking infectious disease. The prominent investment banker who had dropped his champagne glass earlier did not even bother to say goodbye or ask for his coat. He simply signaled to his wife with a sharp jerk of his head turned on his heel and walked straight out the heavy oak front doors. Several other influential couples immediately followed his lead. They set their half-empty plates on the tables, grabbed their expensive handbags, and marched toward the exit without a single backward glance. The Grand Hamptons graduation party was rapidly disintegrating right before my mother's eyes. Beatrice reached out a shaking hand toward a passing couple, her voice a desperate, raspy plea. "Wait, please do not leave," she begged, tears finally streaming down her ruined makeup. "We are about to cut the graduation cake." Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked at her. The social exile was instantaneous and brutal. Cameron watched his wealthy network, the very people he planned to exploit for his future career, walking out the door. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. He realized that his Harvard lie was dead, his car was a fraud, and his wife was leaving him. He had nothing left but his rage, and he aimed all of it directly at me. He let out a guttural scream, balled his hands into tight fists, and lunged across the open space toward me, intending to do physical harm to the sister who had just ruined his pathetic life. But he forgot that I did not come alone, and he was about to make the biggest mistake of his miserable existence. Cameron let out a guttural scream that sounded more like a wounded animal than a Harvard graduate. He lunged forward, closing the distance between us in a fraction of a second. His hands were curled into tight fists, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He wanted to physically tear me down because his pathetic words no longer held any power. Dominic shifted his weight instantly. The cold, professional demeanor vanished, replaced by the lethal reflexes of a former federal agent. He dropped his hand toward his waist, stepping directly into Cameron's path to intercept the attack. But Dominic did not even have to raise his arm to protect me. Before he could make his move, a blur of emerald green darted across the marble floor. Simone hit her husband with the force of a speeding freight train. She did not slap him this time. She planted both of her hands firmly and squarely on his chest and shoved him backward with absolutely everything she had. The impact caught Cameron completely off guard. His expensive leather shoes slipped on the highly polished marble floor, and he stumbled backward wildly, his arms flailing in the air to catch his balance. He crashed heavily into the thick wooden dining table behind him, sending crystal champagne glasses and silver platters clattering loudly to the floor. He groaned loudly, clutching his ribs, looking up in absolute shock at the woman who had just physically launched him across the room. Simone stood directly in front of me, breathing heavily, her eyes blazing with a terrifying protective fury. She formed an unbreakable human shield between me and the man she was preparing to divorce. "Do not even think about it," Cameron Simone shouted, her voice echoing with the undeniable authority of a woman who had reached her absolute limit. "If you take one more step toward her, if you lay a single finger on her, I swear to God, I will personally make sure you do not survive the night in a holding cell." Cameron stared at her, his chest heaving, his face a pathetic mixture of betrayal and sheer terror. "Simone," he gasped, grabbing the edge of the dining table to pull himself upright. "She is ruining our lives. She is tearing our family apart. You are my wife. You should be standing with me. I am standing exactly where I belong." Simone fired back, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "I am standing with the only person in this entire miserable family who actually knows the meaning of hard work and basic honesty. You ruined your own life, Cameron. You stole my identity. You stole your sister's inheritance. You lied to everyone in this room. You are not a victim. You are a common criminal. And if you try to hurt her because you cannot handle the consequences of your own pathetic actions, I will call my security contacts right now and have you dragged out of this villa in handcuffs before the police even get here." Cameron shrank back, completely emasculated. The few remaining wealthy guests who had not already fled the party were watching the confrontation with morbid fascination. They saw a so-called genius being aggressively disciplined by his incredibly successful wife, while his little sister, the supposed family fool, stood calmly behind her, pulling all the strings. Simone did not break eye contact with him until he physically lowered his gaze and slumped against the table, completely defeated. Once she was absolutely sure he was no longer a physical threat, she slowly turned around to face me. The burning anger in her eyes softened instantly. We looked at each other, really looked at each other for the first time in the entire history of our chaotic family dynamic. We had always been polite, but my mother had carefully orchestrated our relationship to keep us distant. Beatrice knew that if the smart, independent Black woman ever truly teamed up with the resilient, resourceful scapegoat, her toxic little empire would crumble overnight. And she was absolutely right. Simone looked at the heavy red envelope in my hand. Then she looked up at my face and gave me a single firm nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of deep mutual respect. It was the cementing of a powerful alliance between two women who adamantly refused to be victims of Cameron's fragile ego or Beatrice's manipulative cruelty. "I am so sorry I did not see it sooner," Sloane Simone said quietly, her voice steady but laced with genuine regret. "I let them paint a picture of you that was completely false. I should have known much better." "You see it now," I replied softly, offering her a genuine smile. "That is all that matters. Welcome to the real world, Simone." But he forgot that I did not come alone, and he was about to make the biggest mistake of his miserable existence. Before Cameron could even take a second step past Simone to reach me, Dominic moved. He did not shout or adopt a traditional fighting stance. He simply stepped forward with terrifying, calculated precision. His hand shot out and clamped down onto Cameron's wrist, like a vice made of solid steel. With a swift, effortless twist that required absolutely no visible physical exertion, Dominic forced Cameron down onto one knee against the hard marble floor. Cameron let out a sharp yelp of pain, his face instantly draining of all color as the sudden physical reality of his situation set in. Dominic held him there for exactly 3 seconds, just long enough to ensure Cameron understood exactly who was in absolute control of the room. Then Dominic released his iron grip, stepped back, and calmly adjusted the silver cufflinks of his pristine charcoal gray suit. Cameron scrambled backward like a frightened child, clutching his sore wrist and breathing heavily. He looked up at Dominic, his previous arrogant rage completely replaced by a deep instinctual terror. He finally realized he was severely outmatched in every possible way. "I believe we have tolerated enough of your physical outbursts today," Dominic said, his voice deep, resonant, and echoing with absolute unwavering authority. "Since your sister has graciously laid out the financial reality of your pathetic situation, it is time I officially introduce myself." Dominic turned slightly, addressing both Cameron and the remaining wealthy guests, who were watching the scene unfold with breathless, morbid anticipation. "As Sloane mentioned, my name is Dominic Pierce," he announced, clearly projecting his voice so it reached the back of the massive room. "I currently serve as the lead legal counsel and chief compliance officer for Apex Holdings. However, prior to joining her private firm, I spent 20 consecutive years working directly for the federal government. Specifically, I was a senior supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation running the white-collar financial crimes division." The letters FBI hung in the air like a physical weight. The color completely vanished from Cameron's face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. My mother let out a small, terrified gasp from her velvet chair, shrinking down as if trying to make herself invisible. In the world of high finance and wealthy elites, federal agents were the ultimate grim reapers. They did not care about expensive country club memberships, designer clothes, or old family names. They cared about wire fraud, tax evasion, and lengthy prison sentences in federal penitentiaries. Dominic did not give Cameron a single second to process the rising panic. He slowly walked over to the spot where Cameron had dropped his prized possession just moments before. He reached down and picked up the genuine leather diploma case embossed with the gold Harvard University crest. "You have been waving this impressive piece of leather around all afternoon," Dominic noted, casually brushing a speck of dust off the cover. "You used it as a shield to insult your sister. You claimed it was undeniable proof of your untouchable intellect and your glorious future dominating Wall Street." Dominic looked at Cameron, his expression completely unreadable and utterly devoid of sympathy. Then he unhooked the brass clasps on the side of the folder. He flipped the heavy leather cover open and held it up high, turning it slowly from left to right, so every single person remaining in the room could see inside. The leather case was completely empty. There was no heavy parchment paper. There was no elegant academic calligraphy. There were no prestigious signatures from Ivy League deans. It was just an expensive hollow shell lined with cheap black velvet. It was the absolute perfect physical representation of Cameron's entire pathetic existence. A shiny, expensive exterior hiding absolutely nothing of value inside. Cameron swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the front door as the walls began to close in around him. "A master's degree from Harvard is indeed a highly impressive academic achievement," Dominic said casually, tossing the empty leather case onto a nearby dining table where it landed next to a ruined tray of champagne glasses. "It is truly a shame you never actually earned one." Dominic reached into his inner breast pocket and produced a single sharply folded piece of paper. This one bore the official watermark and distinctive crimson letterhead of the Harvard University Disciplinary Board. "When my investigative team conducted a routine compliance audit of the Apex Education Fund disbursements, we uncovered a massive, glaring discrepancy in your academic standing." Dominic explained, his eyes scanning the formal document. "You did not graduate today, Cameron. In fact, you were officially expelled and permanently banned from the university campus exactly 3 weeks ago." My mother let out a loud sob, burying her face in her trembling hands. Simone crossed her arms tightly, shaking her head in utter disgust, as the final, devastating layers of her husband's pathetic lies were systematically stripped away. Dominic raised the letter and read the final paragraph aloud, ensuring his voice carried maximum impact. The expulsion was not due to poor academic grades. It was handed down by the Federal Ethics Committee. According to the Dean of Students, during your brief time as the treasurer for the University Premier Student Investment Fund, you orchestrated a highly illegal complex scheme to siphon capital away from the university endowment. You embezzled $2 million, Cameron. You stole directly from the brightest students in the country, routed the stolen money through fake shell accounts, and lost every single cent of it on unregulated offshore crypto exchanges. Unregulated offshore crypto exchanges. The sheer magnitude of the theft hung heavily in the air. $2 million. The number echoed in the silent room like a death sentence. Simone stood completely frozen for a fraction of a second, her brilliant mind racing to process the catastrophic revelation. As a top-tier commercial real estate agent, she understood the mechanics of financial fraud better than anyone else in the room. She knew exactly how desperate men behaved when they were backed into a corner. When amateur embezzlers lost that kind of money, they always panicked. They always scrambled to cover their tracks before the authorities noticed the missing funds. And they always stole from the people closest to them first. A look of absolute terror washed over Simone's face. She yanked her designer phone out of the pocket of her emerald pantsuit. Her hands were shaking so violently, she almost dropped the device onto the marble floor. She completely ignored the frantic whispers of the wealthy guests around her. She bypassed her daily business accounts and logged directly into her highly secure private banking portal. She went straight for the accounts tied to her personal, untouchable assets. The assets she had painstakingly acquired long before she ever made the devastating mistake of marrying my brother. She typed in her passcode with frantic, aggressive jabs. The screen loaded slowly, agonizingly slowly. She navigated to the property management section. She clicked on the luxury penthouse condo she owned in Manhattan. It was her prized premarital asset, the absolute foundation of her entire net worth and her ultimate safety net. A sound tore from Simone's throat. It was not a gasp or a sigh. It was a raw, visceral scream of pure, unadulterated agony and rage. It was a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The scream echoed off the walls of the Hamptons villa, instantly drowning out the murmurs of the remaining crowd. Simone looked up from her glowing screen, her eyes wide with a horror so profound it made my own blood run cold. She did not hesitate. She lunged at Cameron, grabbing him by the lapels of his expensive custom suit with such force she nearly lifted him entirely off his feet. "You took out a second mortgage," Simone shrieked, her voice tearing at the seams with absolute fury. "You forged my signature again. You put a massive lien on my premarital condo to try and pay back the money you stole from Harvard." Cameron choked, trying desperately to pry her perfectly manicured fingers off his throat. He could not even formulate a lie. He could not deny a single word. The overwhelming guilt was written all over his sweating, pathetic face. Simone let go of him, shoving him backward with absolute disgust, as if his physical touch was burning her skin. She looked down at her phone again, the glowing screen illuminating the catastrophic ruin of her life's work. It was not just a small temporary loan. It was a completely maxed-out equity withdrawal. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were completely gone. The money had evaporated into the exact same unregulated crypto void where he dumped the stolen student funds. For Simone, this was not just about losing money, it was about the complete annihilation of her survival. As a Black woman in the hyper-competitive, cutthroat world of New York commercial real estate, she had to work 10 times harder than anyone else in this room just to build her flawless, professional reputation. She had sacrificed her youth, her sleep, and her peace of mind to secure her absolute financial independence. Her Manhattan condo was her fortress. Her pristine credit score was her armor. And in a matter of weeks, her fragile, arrogant husband had secretly dismantled her entire empire just to save his own pathetic skin. She realized with a crushing, sickening clarity that her entire life was standing on the absolute brink of ruin. If the bank called in that fraudulent second mortgage, she would lose her home. If the fraud investigation tied her name to his federal crimes, she would lose her real estate license. Everything she had built with her own two hands was bleeding out on the marble floor of my mother's rented Hamptons villa, all because Cameron needed to pretend he was a genius. Simone raised her head. the initial shock and horror evaporating from her face, replaced by a cold, terrifying calculation. She was a brilliant, fierce survivor, and true survivors simply do not ever go down with a sinking ship. She slowly slipped her expensive designer phone safely back into her pocket and took a very deep, steadying breath, mentally preparing herself to cut the toxic deadweight loose forever. Simone turned her back on Cameron. She smoothed her emerald pantsuit, shedding the image of a betrayed, panicked wife. When she looked out at the remaining wealthy guests, her posture was perfect. She commanded the room with the exact same authority she used to close commercial real estate deals. The initial shock was gone, replaced by cold, calculated survival. "Ladies and gentlemen," Simone announced, her voice ringing out clear and completely devoid of any trembling. "I apologize for the sudden disruption to your afternoon. Please consider this my official public statement. Effective immediately, I am filing for a highly contested divorce from Cameron. I will not be associated with a financial fraud." The crowd remained dead silent. Simone did not wait for their gasps or whispered judgments. She pivoted on her designer heels and walked directly over to where Dominic and I were standing. She looked at me first, acknowledging the unspoken alliance we had just formed. Then she locked her dark, calculating eyes directly onto Dominic. She knew he was the federal hammer, and she was ready to make a deal to save her own life. Mr. Pierce, Simone stated loudly, ensuring her voice carried across the room so there would be dozens of witnesses. "You said you spent 20 years running the white-collar financial crimes division. That means you still have high-level contacts at the Federal Bureau. I want full legal immunity." I had absolutely zero knowledge of the $2 million stolen from the Harvard Student Investment Fund, and I refused to let his federal crimes destroy my commercial real estate license or my pristine credit score. Dominic tilted his head slightly, his expression remaining completely stoic, but a faint glimmer of professional respect flashed in his cold eyes. He recognized a formidable asset when he saw one. Simone did not stop. She laid all her cards on the table. "If you guarantee my protection, I will hand over absolutely everything. I have the master passwords to his encrypted laptop. I have the digital access codes to his personal safe. I know exactly which offshore cryptocurrency exchanges he frequents because he foolishly bragged about his trading strategies to me last month, trying to sound smart. I will testify in federal court to every single act of wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement he has committed. I will be your best witness." Cameron let out a pathetic, strangled cry. The reality of his situation was finally crushing him. His own wife, the woman whose pristine credit and high income he had completely relied on, was now serving as the star witness for his federal prosecution. She was handing the FBI the exact roadmap they needed to lock him in a federal penitentiary for the next decade. He scrambled to his feet, his custom suit wrinkled and his tie skewed. "Simone, please," Cameron begged, his voice cracking into a high whine. "You cannot do this. I am your husband. We took sacred vows. We were supposed to build a massive empire together. I only took that money to give us the beautiful life we deserved. You have to stand by my side." Simone turned her head to look at him over her shoulder. The absolute disgust radiating from her face was lethal. "You did not build an empire, Cameron." She fired back, her tone flat. "You built a pathetic paper castle, and you tried to finance it with my blood and sweat. You are nothing but a thief." Cameron took a hesitant step forward, reaching out a trembling hand. "Baby, please, I will go to prison. They will lock me away for years. You have to help me fix this." "You should have thought about federal prison before you forged my signature," Simone replied coldly. Without breaking eye contact with the pathetic man she used to love, Simone reached up. She grabbed the massive diamond engagement ring and the platinum wedding band on her left hand. With one swift motion, she pulled both rings off her finger. She walked to the dining table where Cameron left his half-full crystal champagne flute just moments before his life fell apart. She held her hand over the glass and opened her fingers. The heavy diamond and platinum rings dropped into the golden liquid with a sharp clink. The sound echoed the death of their marriage. "Call a criminal defense lawyer," Cameron Simone said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Because I am calling the Federal Bureau right now. With that final blow, Simone turned on her heel and walked toward the heavy oak front doors of the Hamptons villa. The guests scrambled out of her way, parting to let her pass. She did not look back even once. Her exit was as flawless as her refusal to sink. The heavy oak front doors of the Hamptons villa shut firmly behind Simone, sealing the fate of the golden boy. The echoing thud felt like a judge's gavel coming down on Cameron's entire existence. Without his wife to serve as a financial shield, and with the federal government already building an airtight case against him, his legs finally gave out. Cameron collapsed onto the marble floor, dropping to his knees. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic sobbing sound that made the remaining high society guests physically cringe. Beatrice watched the door close, her mind spinning frantically. The narcissistic bubble she had lived in for her entire life was completely popped. Her precious son, the genius who was supposed to elevate her status to the absolute peak of the social elite, was not just a failure. He was a federal criminal. She pictured the FBI raiding her rented home. She pictured Cameron wearing a cheap orange jumpsuit in a federal penitentiary. The sheer terror of that reality broke through her stubborn denial. She realized in a sudden flash of desperate clarity that there was only one person on the entire planet who possessed the financial firepower to make a $2 million problem disappear. Beatrice slowly turned her head and looked at me. The venomous hatred that had twisted her features just 10 minutes ago vanished completely. It was replaced by a look so sickeningly sweet and desperately fragile that it almost made my stomach turn. She pushed herself up from the velvet chair, her knees trembling, and stumbled across the room toward me. She did not march or strut. She practically crawled. She closed the distance and dropped to her knees right in front of me, grabbing the hem of my dress with her shaking, manicured hands. "Sloane, please," Beatrice sobbed, her voice cracking as she forced massive crocodile tears to spill down her cheeks. "My beautiful, smart daughter, you have to save us. You are the only one who can fix this terrible misunderstanding." I did not step back. I simply looked down at the woman gripping my dress. The same woman who had shoved a catering invoice into my chest and told me I was a useless fool an hour ago. "You are so incredibly successful, Sloane." Beatrice continued weeping loudly, trying to pull on maternal bonds that never actually existed. "I am so unbelievably proud of the empire you built. You are a billionaire. $2 million is nothing to you. It is just pocket change for a massive company like Apex Holdings. You can write a check to Harvard right now. You can pay back the student fund and hire the best lawyers to make this entire federal investigation go away." She reached up and grabbed my hands, squeezing them tightly with her cold, sweaty fingers. "He is your brother Sloane," she begged, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "He made a stupid, youthful mistake. He was just overly ambitious. You cannot let them take him away to prison. He would not survive a week in a place like that. We are family. Blood is thicker than anything else in this world. You have so much money now. You can save your family with a single phone call." I stared down at her, watching the pathetic, fake tears ruin her expensive makeup. She was not crying for me. She was not apologizing for stealing my inheritance or for throwing me out into the street when I was a teenager. She was crying because her shiny trophy son was broken, and she wanted me to buy her a new one. "Please, Sloane." Beatrice wailed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings as the last few wealthy guests finally scurried out the side doors, unable to witness any more of the humiliating spectacle. "I know I was hard on you growing up. I know I pushed you away. But that was only because I saw your incredible potential. I knew you were strong enough to survive on your own. Cameron was always so fragile. I had to protect him. I was just practicing tough love to make you into the brilliant powerhouse CEO you are today. You owe your incredible work ethic to me. Now please be the bigger person and save your brother." I looked down at the woman who had emotionally abused me for 3 decades. I looked at the hands that had forged my signature on bank documents, stealing my entire future just to fund her son's gambling habits. I looked at the mother who had watched me sleep in my car and told her friends I was simply backpacking to find myself. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no obligation. I felt nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of permanent closure. I gently reached down and pried my mother's trembling fingers off the pristine fabric of my dress. I took one deliberate step backward, creating a physical boundary between her desperate theatrical performance and my absolute reality. The marble floor was cold and unforgiving beneath her knees, but it was nothing compared to the absolute ice running through my veins. "You want to talk about family, Mother?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying register that carried across the empty room. "You want to talk about blood and obligations and tough love? Let us take a slow walk down memory lane and look at exactly how this family operates when someone is actually in desperate need." Beatrice looked up at me, her fake tears stalling on her cheeks, as she realized her ultimate manipulation tactic was failing spectacularly. "Do you remember the winter I turned 20? I asked, staring directly down at her heavily powdered face. "I had a severe kidney infection. I was working 3 minimum wage jobs, and I could not afford the basic antibiotics. I called you from a dirty free clinic payphone begging for just $50. I was running a dangerous fever and I was completely terrified. You told me I was interrupting your important country club luncheon. You told me to drink more tap water, and then you hung up on me. You let your own daughter suffer in a freezing charity clinic while you drank expensive mimosas with the exact same women who just walked out of your life 5 minutes ago." Beatrice swallowed hard, looking away nervously. "That is not fair," she whispered weakly, trying to avoid my gaze. "What about the time my beat-up sedan broke down on the side of the highway during a massive blizzard?" I continued, relentless in my calculated breakdown of her maternal failures. "I lived in that car, Mother. It was my only shelter. I called you freezing to death asking if I could simply sleep on the living room floor just for one night until the winter storm passed. You told me Cameron had his college friends over for a luxury ski weekend, and my pathetic presence would ruin the aesthetic of the house. You told me to go find a crowded homeless shelter. You left me out in the freezing snow while you bought him designer ski gear with the exact money you stole from my trust fund." Cameron groaned from his pathetic spot on the floor, but I did not even look at him. My focus was entirely on the woman who created this monster. "You did not push me away to make me strong, Mother," I said, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "You pushed me away because I was a financial inconvenience to your fake wealthy lifestyle. You starved me out. You watched me struggle, and you did absolutely nothing. You took my father's protection away and gave it to a spoiled boy who used it to buy fake prestige." Beatrice tried to reach for my dress again, but Dominic stepped forward slightly, his massive federal presence forcing her to immediately keep her hands to herself. "So no, Mother." I announced, the words ringing clear and loud. "I am not writing a check. I am not paying off Harvard. I am not hiring a team of expensive corporate defense attorneys to save the golden boy from his own criminal actions. My company makes billions of dollars, and I would honestly rather burn $2 million in a massive bonfire on the beach than give a single cent to either of you." "Sloane, please," Beatrice wailed, clapping her hands together. "You cannot possibly mean that." "I mean every single syllable," I replied, completely unmoved by her panic. "What is happening today is not a tragedy, Mother. It is simply natural consequences. You enabled his extreme entitlement. You taught him that federal laws do not apply to him as long as he looks the part. Well, the real world does not care about your country club aesthetic. You raised a thief. Now you get to visit him behind glass." The words struck her like a physical blow. The pathetic, fragile mother act vanished in a fraction of a second. The venomous, narcissistic monster snapped right back to the surface. Her face twisted into an ugly, hateful snarl. She pushed herself violently off the marble floor, her expensive designer dress wrinkling around her knees. "You selfish, ungrateful little witch!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking into a vicious shriek. "You planned this. You came here today to destroy us because you are rotten to the very core. You think your money makes you untouchable. I will go to the press. I will tell everyone how you manipulated this situation. I will completely ruin your corporate reputation." She took a threatening step toward me, raising her hand to strike. Dominic shifted his stance, but Beatrice's vicious threats were suddenly and violently cut short. A piercing mechanical wail ripped through the quiet Hamptons air, shattering the afternoon. It was the undeniable sound of approaching sirens. The noise grew exponentially louder with every passing second, echoing off the expensive coastal properties and cutting through the thick tension inside the villa. Suddenly, brilliant flashes of red and blue light exploded through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room. The strobe effect painted the walls the ruined graduation cake and the terrified faces of my mother and brother in harsh alternating colors. It was the absolute end of their carefully constructed illusion. The aggressive crunch of heavy tires tearing up the pristine white gravel driveway signaled their arrival. 3 massive unmarked black SUVs, accompanied by 2 local police cruisers, swerved to a halt right in front of the grand entrance. The vehicles did not park neatly. They angled aggressively, blocking any possible avenue of escape. The heavy thud of car doors slamming shut in rapid succession sounded like a military drumbeat marking the final countdown of Cameron's freedom. Beatrice froze, completely paralyzed. The hand she had raised to strike me dropped limply to her side. The vicious snarl vanished from her face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She stared at the flashing lights illuminating the sheer curtains, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw a single breath. Cameron let out a pathetic, whimpering sound. He scrambled backward across the polished marble floor, his expensive custom shoes slipping wildly as he fought for traction. He backed himself into the far corner of the room, knocking over a silver tray of abandoned appetizers. He pulled his knees up to his chest, trying to make himself as small as possible, but there was absolutely nowhere to hide in the massive open-concept living room. Dominic did not even blink. He remained perfectly still, his posture completely relaxed amidst the sudden chaos. He slowly raised his left arm, pulling back the sleeve of his tailored suit jacket to glance casually at the face of his custom gold watch. Right on time, Dominic announced, his deep voice cutting cleanly through the wail of the sirens outside. The federal government operates on a very strict schedule. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation do not take kindly to $2 million disappearing across state lines. They tend to act with extreme prejudice when wire fraud on that massive scale is involved. Beatrice spun around to face him, her eyes wide with frantic disbelief. "You called them!" she shrieked, her voice completely hysterical. "You actually called the authorities on your own brother. I did not call the police." "Mother," I replied calmly, crossing my arms over my chest. The compliance software at the Apex Education Fund automatically flagged the massive discrepancies in his Harvard accounts 3 weeks ago. Dominic simply compiled the financial evidence and handed it over to his former colleagues at the Bureau. "I just chose to delay the arrest warrant until today so you could host this lovely graduation party first." Before Beatrice could scream another insult, the heavy oak front doors burst open. The doors flew back on their hinges, hitting the interior walls with a violent crash. A team of federal agents flooded into the grand foyer. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision. They were wearing dark, tactical vests with the letters FBI printed across their chests in bold yellow text. Local police officers followed closely behind them, securing the perimeter and blocking the massive front entrance so nobody could slip out. "Federal agents, nobody move!" A tall, broad-shouldered agent shouted, his voice booming with absolute authority. "Keep your hands where we can see them and stay exactly where you are." The agents fanned out across the luxurious space, immediately securing all the exits. They moved past the tables covered in expensive imported linens and half-empty crystal champagne flutes. The stark contrast between the elite high society party decor and the grim tactical reality of federal law enforcement was absolutely jarring. The few catering staff members who had remained behind to clean up immediately backed away against the walls, raising their hands in silent compliance. Beatrice let out a high-pitched wail. She grabbed the edge of the velvet dining chair, her knees buckling once again as an agent marched directly toward the center of the room. This was not country club gossip. This was not a minor social misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a generous charity donation or a fake smile. This was the absolute crushing weight of the federal justice system crashing down on her perfect family. The lead agent scanning the room locked his eyes on the pathetic figure cowering in the corner. He recognized the target immediately from the case file. He pointed a firm, commanding finger directly at my brother, ordering him to step forward and face the reality he could no longer outrun. Cameron did not move. He pressed his back harder against the expensive wallpaper, his eyes darting frantically around the room, as if a secret trapdoor might magically open beneath him. The tall, broad-shouldered lead agent did not repeat his command. He simply nodded to two other heavily armed federal officers standing near the doorway. They marched across the polished marble floor, their heavy tactical boots crunching over the broken glass of the dropped champagne flutes. They reached the corner and hauled Cameron to his feet without a single ounce of gentleness. Cameron let out a high-pitched yelp, his legs giving out instantly like a rag doll. The agents did not care. They spun him around, slammed his chest firmly against the wall, and wrenched his arms behind his back. The sharp, heavy click of cold steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists echoed through the silent villa. It was the sound of his entire fake future snapping completely shut. Cameron, the lead agent, announced, his voice echoing with cold mechanical authority. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Cameron broke down completely. The so-called Harvard genius, the golden boy, who just 30 minutes ago told me to go scrub pools, was now openly weeping. Tears and snot ran down his face, soaking into the collar of his expensive custom suit. He babbled incoherently, begging the agents to let him go, promising he could get the money back, swearing it was all a big misunderstanding. They ignored his pathetic whining entirely, forcefully, marching him toward the front doors. Beatrice watched her precious son being dragged away in chains. She clamped her hands over her mouth, shaking her head in violent denial. She took a step toward the center of the room, perhaps intending to follow him or beg the agents for mercy, but her path was abruptly blocked. A stern-looking female agent with a severe blonde bun and a dark tactical vest stepped directly in front of her. Beatrice blinked, looking at the agent with a mixture of confusion and absolute indignation. "Excuse me," Beatrice snapped, her voice trembling, but still laced with that familiar, arrogant country club entitlement. "Step aside right now. That is my son. You cannot just take him away like this. I need to call my family lawyer immediately. You will have plenty of time to call a lawyer from the federal holding facility." The female agent replied, her tone completely devoid of emotion. She reached to her utility belt and pulled out a second pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Beatrice, you are also under arrest." The color drained instantly from my mother's face. She stumbled backward, bumping hard into the velvet dining chair. "Under arrest," she gasped, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical shriek. "For what? I did not do anything wrong. I am the victim here. My son made the financial mistake, not me. You have absolutely no right to touch me. You are being charged with historic trust fund embezzlement," the agent stated, taking a firm step forward, "and multiple counts of federal tax evasion." Beatrice froze, her eyes darting frantically toward Dominic. Dominic simply adjusted his tie and offered her a cold, empty smile. "When my audit team examined the financial records of this property to prepare your eviction notice," Dominic explained smoothly, ensuring his voice carried over the chaos, "we uncovered decades of hidden financial discrepancies. You did not just steal your daughter's $200,000 trust fund. You systematically hid that stolen income from the federal government using fraudulent offshore shell companies. You have not paid a single cent of legitimate income tax in over 15 years. I forwarded that comprehensive audit to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division 3 days ago. They were incredibly eager to join the FBI on this little field trip." The realization that her entire life was completely over finally shattered Beatrice's fragile mind. She did not just cry, She completely lost her grip on sanity. As the female agent lunged forward to grab her wrist, Beatrice let out a feral, ear-piercing scream. "No!" she shrieked wildly, swinging her expensive designer handbag at the officer's head. "Get your filthy hands off me! I am a respectable woman. I belong to the elite. You cannot do this to me." She fought like a cornered wild animal. She kicked her leg, her expensive designer heels flying off and skidding across the marble floor. She clawed at the agent's tactical vest, completely destroying her perfect manicure. Two more officers had to rush over to subdue her. They forced her face down onto the grand dining table right into the ruins of Cameron's graduation cake. White frosting and expensive fondant smeared all over her heavily powdered face and her thousands of dollar designer dress. "Let me go!" she wailed, thrashing violently as the officers wrenched her arms behind her back and snapped the steel cuffs shut. "Sloane, tell them to stop! Sloane, help me!" She looked absolutely pathetic. Her perfect hair was a tangled, frosting-covered mess. Her dress was ruined. Her dignity was entirely eradicated. I stood perfectly still, watching the woman who had tormented me my entire life finally face the ultimate consequences of her toxic greed. I stood perfectly still, watching the woman who had tormented me my entire life finally face the ultimate consequences of her toxic greed. The two federal agents pulled Beatrice up from the ruined dining table with absolutely no regard for her expensive designer dress. Her face was a horrific smeared mess of white vanilla frosting and crushed fondant. The heavy diamond necklace she wore had snapped during her feral struggle, and tiny, incredibly expensive gems now littered the floor, rolling away into the corners of the room like discarded trash. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she tried to shake off the firm grip of the officers, but the cold steel handcuffs locked securely behind her back rendered her completely powerless. Across the room, the lead agent yanked Cameron forward by the collar of his custom-tailored suit. My brother stumbled over his own feet, his head hanging low in absolute crushing defeat. He was sobbing openly now, his shoulders shaking with the weight of his ruined future. The golden boy, the supposed Ivy League genius destined to conquer Wall Street, looked like a pathetic, terrified child being dragged to the principal's office. The agents began to march them both toward the grand entrance. Their path took them directly past the spot where Dominic and I were standing. The few remaining catering staff members pressed themselves flat against the walls, watching the spectacle with wide, astonished eyes. The silence in the room was only broken by the heavy crunch of tactical boots on marble and the pathetic wet sniffling coming from my brother. As Beatrice was dragged past me, she suddenly dug her expensive ruined heels into the floor, forcing the agents to momentarily halt their momentum. She snapped her head up. The frosting smeared across her face could not hide the pure, concentrated venom burning in her eyes. She looked at me with a hatred so deep and profound it was almost palpable. "You are a monster!" Beatrice screamed, her voice tearing out of her throat, raw and jagged. "You planned every single second of this. You set this whole trap up just to destroy your own family. You are completely sick in the head, Sloane. I hope you rot in hell for what you did to us today." I did not flinch. I did not take a step back. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical shrieking. I simply looked at her, my expression completely blank, devoid of any anger, sadness, or pity. I reached up with one hand and casually adjusted the lapel of my jacket, smoothing out an invisible wrinkle in the pristine fabric. "You called me the fool, Mother," I replied, my voice calm, even, and terrifyingly cold. "You spent my entire life convincing everyone I was stupid, weak, and entirely disposable. You stole my inheritance because you thought I was too oblivious to ever notice or fight back. But the true fool is the one who arms her enemy and expects them not to shoot." The words struck her with physical force. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization finally hit her. She had created the exact weapon that just dismantled her entire life. By throwing me out and forcing me to survive in the absolute worst conditions, she had inadvertently forged a billionaire chief executive officer with the resources and the absolute lack of mercy required to orchestrate her federal downfall. "Let us move," the female agent commanded harshly, giving Beatrice a firm shove forward. They dragged her out through the heavy oak doors, Cameron trailing right behind her. The cold coastal wind swept into the grand foyer, carrying the piercing wail of the sirens. I walked slowly toward the entrance, standing on the top step of the porch, to watch the final act of their pathetic play unfold. The red and blue emergency lights washed over the perfectly manicured lawn. The agents pushed Cameron toward the first police cruiser. He did not fight them. He simply bent his head and let them shove him into the cramped back seat. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind him with a loud, absolute finality. Beatrice was much less compliant. She kicked and thrashed as the officers forced her toward the second unmarked vehicle. She tried to scream my name one last time, but an agent firmly pressed a hand on the top of her head, forcing her down into the back seat. The door slammed shut, cutting off her hysterical cries instantly. The agents climbed into the front seats. The engines roared to life, and the heavy tires crunched aggressively over the white gravel driveway as the convoy accelerated toward the main gate. I watched the flashing lights disappear down the winding coastal road. I turned around and looked back inside the villa. Shattered crystals, spilled champagne, and ruined catering littered the floor. The fake prestige and the toxic illusions were gone. The grand celebration was over. The party was officially over. Dominic stepped up beside me, quietly observing the wreckage. We had a massive cleanup ahead of us tomorrow to restore the property. But as the cool ocean breeze drifted through the open doors, I finally felt entirely free. Exactly 1 year has passed since that cool ocean breeze swept the toxic remnants of my family out of my life. 365 days of absolute uninterrupted peace. The justice system moved with surprising speed when presented with Dominic's meticulously organized financial evidence. Cameron did not get to use his fake Harvard charm to sway a jury or manipulate a judge. He took a miserable plea deal the second he realized his own wife had handed the federal prosecution the exact decryption keys to his offshore cryptocurrency accounts. The judge sentenced my golden brother to 10 straight years in a federal penitentiary. There is no custom-tailored suit or leased sports car waiting for him. He spends his days wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, scrubbing the cafeteria floors. It is a harsh reality for a boy who thought he was legally untouchable, but it is exactly the life he earned. My mother did not fare much better. Beatrice narrowly avoided a federal prison sentence by the skin of her teeth, but the Internal Revenue Service absolutely decimated her. They seized every hidden asset, every offshore account, and every single piece of expensive jewelry she managed to conceal over the last decade. She completely bankrupted herself trying to pay the exorbitant retainers for high-profile defense attorneys who ultimately told her she had absolutely no case. The woman who once demanded a $10 million Hamptons villa to impress her country club friends now lives in a tiny run-down studio apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. The peeling yellow wallpaper and the constantly leaking radiator are a far cry from her imported marble floors. Her socialite friends blocked her number the very next morning. She has no elite charity galas to attend, and no genius golden child to parade around. She is completely alone, left to sit in a cramped, drafty room and reflect on the empire she threw away out of sheer spite. While my biological family crashed and burned into absolute ruin, I found a completely unexpected sisterhood in the chaotic aftermath. Simone did not just survive the catastrophic explosion of her marriage, she bounced back beautifully. She secured her legal immunity exactly as Dominic promised. She divorced Cameron with a ruthless legal efficiency that left him with absolutely nothing but his criminal charges. She saved her premarital condo and completely protected her pristine commercial real estate license. Once the dust settled and the final divorce papers were signed, I did what any smart billionaire chief executive officer would do. I offered her a job. Simone is now the vice president of commercial real estate at Apex Holdings. She took over the Manhattan portfolio and increased our quarterly profit margins by 20% in her first 6 months. We work in the same sleek glass building, and we have lunch together almost every single day. We bonded deeply over our shared survival. We understand each other on a level that nobody else possibly could, because we both had to violently cut the exact same toxic dead weight out of our lives to protect our futures. We never talk about Cameron or Beatrice. We talk about market trends, property acquisitions, and our upcoming vacation to the Amalfi Coast. Simone is thriving. She looks 10 years younger, and the heavy, exhausting burden of supporting a fragile, narcissistic man is completely gone from her shoulders. As for me, my life is finally my own. I wake up every morning in a beautiful penthouse overlooking the city skyline, and the only sound I hear is the quiet hum of the city below. There is no more yelling. There is no more walking on eggshells trying to appease a mother who fundamentally despised my existence. There is no more gaslighting. For 33 years, I was told I was the defective child, the family fool who would never amount to anything. I was conditioned to believe that every cruel joke and every financial theft was somehow my own fault. But that heavy, suffocating fog has completely lifted. I do not scrub floors anymore unless I accidentally spill my own expensive coffee. I sit at the head of a massive boardroom table surrounded by brilliant, fiercely loyal people like Dominic and Simone who respect me for my intellect and my unrelenting drive. I built an empire from the absolute dirt, and I defended it against the very people who tried to bury me. I look out at the Manhattan skyline, and I feel nothing but pure earned success. The family scapegoat did not just escape the slaughter. She bought the entire farm and changed the locks. And for the first time in my entire life, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. I stand here now in the quiet sanctuary of my Manhattan penthouse, letting the warmth of the morning sun wash over my face. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer an unobstructed panoramic view of the city that never sleeps. Down below, millions of people are rushing to their jobs, fighting their own battles, and chasing their own versions of success. But up here, above the noise and the chaos, there is only absolute tranquility. I place my hands against the cool, thick glass and look out over the empire I built from absolute scratch. I look back at the Hamptons villa incident, not with anger, but with profound, absolute clarity. That day was a masterclass in the destructive power of narcissism. Beatrice and Cameron built their entire identities on a fragile bed of lies. They spent their lives performing for an audience of high society elites who abandoned them the very second the facade cracked. They valued the perception of wealth far more than they valued actual integrity. They chased the spotlight so desperately that they completely blinded themselves to the incoming train. When you build a house entirely out of stolen cards, it only takes one single breath of truth to bring the whole pathetic structure crashing down. My truth was that breath. I did not destroy them. They destroyed themselves. I simply handed them the mirror they had been avoiding for 15 years. For decades, I was held hostage by a single biological fact. My mother and my brother believed that sharing a genetic code gave them an unlimited all-access pass to my emotional and financial resources. They weaponized the concept of family to justify their cruelty, their theft, and their endless gaslighting. They expected me to absorb their abuse simply because we shared the same last name. But true family has absolutely nothing to do with bloodlines. Family is built on a solid foundation of mutual respect, unwavering support, and basic human decency. Blood only makes you related. Loyalty and respect are what make you family. I chose my family when I partnered with Dominic and when I hired Simone. We protect each other. We uplift each other. We do not steal from one another in the dark. If there is one crucial lesson I learned from the wreckage of my past, it is the absolute vital importance of financial independence. Money is not just about buying custom-tailored suits or leasing luxury sports cars for the sake of empty optics. Money is a shield. It is the ultimate armor against manipulation. When you control your own finances, you control your own destiny. You gain the terrifying, beautiful power to look your abusers dead in the eye and say absolutely no more. You gain the ability to set unbreakable boundaries and strictly enforce them. My mother thought my lack of a trust fund would keep me subservient and desperate. Instead, the hunger she forced upon me taught me how to hunt. It taught me how to survive in the harshest corporate environments and how to build a fortress so massive that her toxic entitlement could never breach the walls. Setting boundaries is often painted as a harsh or aggressive act, but it is actually the most profound form of self-love. When I handed my mother that eviction notice, and when I exposed my brother's massive federal fraud, I was not acting out of malice. I was acting out of pure self-preservation. I was drawing a massive, impenetrable line in the sand and declaring that my peace of mind was no longer up for negotiation. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always call you selfish when you finally start enforcing them. They will weaponize your guilt and try to drag you back into their chaotic dysfunction. You have to stand firm. You have to realize that you are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. The absolute best revenge is not screaming or fighting in a rented Hamptons villa. The best revenge is massive, undeniable success. It is waking up every single day knowing that nobody can ever take away what you have built because you earned every single brick with your own two hands. It is living a beautiful, peaceful life, completely free from their toxic influence and never looking back at the wreckage they created. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Tell me how you took your power back in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories of sweet absolute justice. Until next time, know your worth.